Trade deficit report released on the 3rd, interest rate hike by the Fed yesterday, and jobs numbers released today, specifically this morning. What does this all mean? And what did I, the great backseat economist, glean from this information? I actually gleaned a lot, and I'm going to get a little intense here because I kind of went down a bit of a Wizard of Oz path here with the information I was looking into. It was a rabbit hole, to say the least. And now I'm going to kind of take you with it. All right. So what kicked things off here was this jobs report. And what bewildered me about this job report was that it didn't appear to be any sort of great achievement, and yet it was being talked about as if it was some sort of breakthrough, as if it's a huge sign that our economy is still going strong. And I just had a lot of questions. And you can see here on the graph of the past about year and a half, almost 2 years. It is 2 years actually. No, I'm sorry, a year. The past year, you can see that the jobs reports month by month they have literally all been higher than the one we got this month. So if anything, it looks like job growth is slowing, and yet this number is being heralded as a effectively much higher number, I guess, than what people had anticipated. And I understand the initial response, which is that this is being championed because interest rates have been rising for the past 5-6 months, right? And so, common knowledge amongst economists and your amateurs alike is that as interest rates rise to combat inflation, typically the job market is heavily dampened, and basically the Federal Reserve wants that to be the case. The government even wants that to be the case because it's this common thought that if the job market continues to expand, demand for U.S. goods will expand. There will be more disposable income, more cash in the average American's pocket, and therefore prices will continue to rise or at least not decrease to the level that we would like. So this idea didn't sit well with me. The idea that a slow jobs report is preferable in a time of inflationary measures. As much as it makes sense on the surface, hey, we need less people to have less money because when they spend that money, inflation pressures get worse. On the surface, it makes sense. But hyperinflation, inflation and hyperinflation in general are signs of an unhealthy economy. And I just didn't understand how the suppression of the American workforce could make our economy healthier. Then I saw the Bureau of Economic Analysis trade report. And now this showed something that was contrary to what I wanted to believe months ago and, and did say on my channel months ago, and that our deficit is actually starting to grow again. Now, I have harped on the deficit for many videos. I'm very intense about it, and I'm intense about it because it just, on a very, very visceral level, it does not make sense for this to go unknown and for this to go untalked about as much as it does. Our deficit, our trade deficit, is a direct relation to our GDP. And if you don't remember GDP, and that good old GDP formula is the adding of consumption, which is me, you, the average consumer, spending money on the open market, which is going up. It is always going up, and it is going up, especially now because of the inflationary pressures you've seen on the prices, the price increases, right? So the amount of money we're spending to buy things is up. Investments should be and is going down. Interest rates have been rising, thereby investments will be down. They have a negative correlation with each other. Government purchases, that is the government making open purchases, the government spending money in our economy, and that is always going up, it seems. They're always finding new ways to spend money, whether that is just handing out money through stimulus programs or actually purchasing through the use of bills and through the use of the budget, actually purchasing goods on the open market. Then you have net exports, and this is what I harp on to the heavens, to the high heavens come home. Net exports. This is the actual difference between what we are exporting and importing. So if you are a profit-seeking company or country, and you want to make sure that you actually bring in profit, you will want to make sure that the amount of goods that are exiting and being sold out of your company or your country are more than the cost of the raw materials you brought in to make those goods. That is the undeniable basis of how to make a profit in any industrial pursuit, right? And so, if you fall short, if there is a deficit of what's coming in versus what's going out, if you are America, you will then take a loan to tide over that shortfall. If you are a company, you can only take so many periods of that before you have to declare bankruptcy. So now that I've properly scared you about the trade deficit that I'm about to speak on, I want to roll back down to July and June, and I actually did a video again on this where I expressed the pleasure that I had in the narrowing of the deficit, and effectively it was my hope that the narrowing of the deficit reflected a time period in which we were able to gain a comparative advantage over China, our main importer, or the main country we import from. We were able to maintain and gain some sort of advantage over them due to the disruption that COVID caused. And my hope was that the supply shortages that we saw forced American companies to start to seek out American manufacturers for their raw materials and goods. And that was why I was hoping the deficit was decreasing. Now, you can see that at the height of its decrease, somewhere back in April, uh, or at the height of its increase, I'm sorry, at the height of its increase, somewhere back in April, that's when May, June, July hit, and it started decreasing, and that's when I had these false fuzzy feelings. But now we've seen a proper correction of that, and here we are on another path of increasing. So that lower jobs report, which it is a lower report, as I showed, in comparison to other months, in combination with that recently released trade deficit report, and then in combination with the knowledge of knowing that interest rates were again to be hiked up by the Fed, thereby causing a disinvestment in American industry and making our goods more expensive to export. I said, I don't understand how any of this can be A, ignored, and B, the jobs report can be championed like this is some sort of great achievement. So I had to continue on in my research, and I really wanted to know, is the goods and services sector, the manufacturing portion of that, is that sector, were they able to achieve some sort of foothold? Were they able to supplant China in any way? Is this sector doing better, and thereby this increase in deficit may be just temporary, and thereby the actual jobs numbers that are lessened aren't much of a concern, and we're really just really more concerned about tamping down inflation, not so much concerned about the permanent drawback in industry. So I head on over to my local Bureau of Labor Statistics shop here. Again, more government numbers. And I look up what our labor productivity and manufacturing output is. Starting with labor productivity and the output that our labor is producing and manufacturing, everything looks great. Everything's up. Everything's up consistently since the start of the pandemic. You can see here Q2 2020 to last quarter of 2022, everything is up except for hours worked. And that part I did notice and didn't quite understand when I first saw it. We'll come back to that later. So, we also look at just the overall output for all industries alike, all major industries, and the only industry that saw any sort of drawback was motor vehicles. But every industry other than that has seen a consistent increase in output. So now I'm looking like, okay, things don't look so bad. Possibly manufacturing is just seeing a brief slowdown, a brief drawback, possibly just a rebound from the massive demand that was pent up. And possibly we will see this expansion of the deficit go back and start to decrease over time. We're actually still at a smaller deficit number than what we were 4 quarters ago. And so The output of the manufacturing looks good. The constant increasing of manufacturing tells me that any lost jobs, that any smaller job rate is most likely due to some sort of effect on the willingness of the labor force to work, less on the decline of actual manufacturing and actual goods and services output. And that is a great thing if it were true. But I don't know how to leave well enough alone. And I had this nagging suspicion that just like the deficit numbers, just like the calculations in our GDP, inflation might be actually making these numbers appear higher than what they really are. And what it obviously is linked to is just the increase in spending, the increase in the prices of things causing higher nominal numbers, but not necessarily higher output, like that graph would have suggested. So I looked up what is called the Purchasing Managers Index. Now, this is an indice that economists use to measure the actual rise, drop, or stagnation in real orders filled, and the rate at which those orders are filled in the manufacturing and industrial sectors of our economy. So, effectively, what this is trying to measure is our actual orders, our actual outputs increasing, not just the money, the nominal value of things going out the door. We know inflation increases that, but are the actual amount of goods sold, are the actual amount of orders taken and filled, are those actually increasing? And you can see here, unfortunately, no. In fact, it is decreasing. And on the same time period that you see that the manufacturing output is continuously increasing, on the same time period that you see a slight decrease in the import export deficit, you are seeing a actual decrease in the purchasing managers index. Now, to further kind of make this make sense, the index measures anything that's above 50, a score of 50, as expansionary times in that industry in manufacturing. So manufacturing is expanding, right? At 50 exactly, manufacturing is stagnated, and below 50 is a contractionary period. You can see that our latest reading is 50.2, and that's gone down from the mid 60s. So it is very, very close to a period of complete stagnation and then contraction. So, to answer my previous and original question, why is it that the Fed and the government seems to promote the idea that in an inflationary environment, we want small job growth? That is because, and I've spoken about this so many times, it's getting annoying, but I will never stop. We are growing the wrong sectors of our economy. We are growing sectors that don't actually produce any goods and services, meaning a lot more of our money, a lot more of our consumption, a lot more of the supply of the US dollar is going towards things that are not actually backed by real products. You see that with the decline in manufacturing. You see that with the decline in services. You see that although the aggregate output, the nominal output is up, the real actual orders, the real actual production is down, and the deficit is growing again. You see that we did not gain any real ground on China, and we are actually experiencing a negative purchasing power parity when it comes to our inflation rate versus our normal export partners of the EU. And just so you know what I mean when I talk about gaining traction on companies because of the inflationary environment we were, I don't want to say enjoying, but we had. And just so you understand what I mean by the other major exporting partners that we have not actually importing enough of our goods because of that purchasing power parity, look at the recent inflation numbers. Look at how China has been almost the least inflationary economy on the globe in the major powers since the entire disruption from COVID and the Russian-Ukraine war has kicked off. Now, look at where the United States is. 8.2%. So China's at 2.8, the United States is at 8.2. This is why this matters. Our currency for a brief period of time is actually depreciating against the yuan. The yuan is appreciating against the dollar. And the reason why that is a good thing is because we enjoy or don't, they enjoy a massive advantage over us when it comes to the manufacturing industry, when it comes to the manufacturers of goods and services. And historically, they have maintained a large depreciated yuan against the dollar, making it such that it is cheaper for American companies, US manufacturers, to import from China than it is to import or to go ahead and buy American made goods. So, in this time period where we saw massive inflation and they saw modest inflation, we actually were in a position where we were making US manufactured goods cheaper comparatively than Chinese manufactured goods. And we were promoting a climate, unbeknownst to us, we are promoting a climate when that type of inflation difference happens, where US manufacturing could maybe gain a foothold to soak up that vacuum of saying, hey, even though years ago, we were always more expensive to buy American. It's always less expensive to buy offshore for our raw materials. Look at how cheapened now our actual dollar is, right, in comparison. Now, China is looking at American exports and going, hey, they're a little more attractive. They're a little more attractive. And US manufacturing is looking at our own goods and things are a little more attractive. So we didn't soak that up. We didn't do it, right? And the reason why I know we didn't do it is because of that index, right? And that index shows us that orders had been on the decline. So if we had soaked that up, if we had actually supplanted them in any way, any meaningful way, our uh, our orders wouldn't be on the decline in manufacturing. And our actual partners that we normally export to, Mexico, the European Union, Germany, United Kingdom, our major export partners are actually having higher inflation than us. So that means that their currencies are actually devaluing or depreciating compared to our currencies, making our goods, because our inflationary rates are smaller than theirs, even though we're all going through inflationary times. Ours is smaller than theirs, and that means our goods are now more expensive in comparison, which means our demand for our exports are even less. So, at the same time that we could have supplanted China in many ways in manufacturing, which clearly we have not, we are losing exports to these other countries that are seeing our goods as more expensive because of their own inflationary issues. So it's about dinner time. Let's bring it on home here. I'm concerned. Obviously, manufacturing is heading toward contractionary phase, and despite that, the output numbers look good. We are all signs pointing towards the fact that it's due to inflation. Despite the fact that GDP is probably going to look somewhat modest, 2 to 3%, not great. I guarantee you, and any real economist that does any real research should tell you that that's also probably because of inflation, an increase in spending that is not backed up by actual goods. And that is clearly shown in the orders and orders not filled and the stagnation in the manufacturing industry, and now the growth of the deficit once again. These things are all connected. And what's really concerning me is that the time to where these things could have been improved upon is past. We are now on our fourth round of interest rate hikes, which means that our dollar is only going to continue to appreciate, which means inflation will get under control. And as inflation gets under control and our dollar continues to appreciate, we will continue to cut the knees out of US manufacturing, because we will continue to make, in comparison, purchasing power parity, their goods, our goods, look more expensive, thereby reducing the demand for exports versus these other countries who are either A, still in inflationary times with devalued currency, or B, they themselves have started to focus on their own domestic manufacturing capabilities, which we clearly have not. And that is my biggest concern about what is most likely going to be a looming recession, because we have not learned our lesson from the COVID environment, where we saw our supply shortages for all kinds of goods just cease to exist. We have not really started supplanting China in any meaningful way in the manufacturing industries, and the time period to do that under clearly has been missed. So I'd like to end it on a good note. I didn't like those numbers, man. I didn't like them. I didn't like them. And I don't like the way they were pushed out by the White House, where this Goldilocks zone jobs report, not too great, not too bad. The only way in which you look at a jobs report and say, hey, too high would have been bad, is if those jobs were being created and that money was being produced when not backed up by any products and services. And America has been doing that for far too long. And the only way you look at that kind of report and think that is if you know you're doing the wrong thing. There is no company in this world that would look and say, hey, we had a smaller profit, therefore hired fewer people. That's a good thing. No, it would never happen. If your people are being hired because you're generating more profit, because you're pushing out more goods, there's always going to be a good thing. That's always going to be healthy. Period. So, on a good note, it is Friday, and it's going to be a beautiful weekend. So, enjoy your weekend and do your own research. Look at the numbers. Come up with your own ideas. I want to hear them. I want to discuss them. I'd love to have guests on to discuss these numbers with. So feel free to message me, message the backseat economist, gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, trust the numbers.